thanks to the Turkish Cultural Foundation for this invitation. I'm very honored to speak in this context to this distinguished audience. And the topic I chose, as Professor Atasoy said, is related to my PhD researches. Began in the 90s. I was first drawn to this topic by curiosity. I was traveling and admiring Istanbul as a cosmopolitan, multicultural city. I realized that there was a strong Italian presence of some kind, and I decided to do a research, historical research on this presence. What I will present here today is a very broad, panoramic overview of the topic, trying also to correct or revise some ideas, some cliches or myths that are attached to the topic of Italian presence in the architecture of Istanbul. I would like to start by mentioning something that happened in a recent conference in Egypt, in Alexandria, in 2007. It was a conference on Italian presence in the Mediterranean architecture, with scholars focusing on different geographies like Turkey, Lebanon, Egypt, and North Africa, the colonial aspect of Italian Mediterranean architecture. Now, the interesting thing was that we realized that in Turkey, in Lebanon, and in Egypt, there is this common assumption that every building of some distinction from the 19th century or early 20th century is automatically attributed to an Italian architect. It's a kind of popular perception, attribution, but historical evidence, of course, is rather different. So why? I was curious about the reasons of this association, architecture of some kind and Italian agency, Italian design. Of course, in Egypt, there is statistically a strong presence of Italian builders, architects. Among the foreign builders, there is a strong majority of Italian. In Lebanon, this is not the case. It's very difficult to trace the intervention, the contribution of Italian builders, at least based on documents on historical documents. In Istanbul, also in Istanbul, there is this attitude of considering Italian. Afif Batur, an expert on 19th century architecture, Professor Batur, which helped me a lot also in my research, first pointed to me this fact. In Istanbul also, every building that is considered beautiful of this period usually is attributed to an Italian architect, usually unknown, usually. So the reason of these tendencies, if we think of the historical reasons for these tendencies, of course, the first thing that comes to our mind is probably the connection between Venice, Genoa, and the Eastern Mediterranean. This is one fact. It's something that entered collective memory of both Italy and Turkey, and it's an historical link. So here I want to start with this image, which is Venetian. It's related to the Venetian-Ottoman connection. But before...
where is this building?
It's Palazzo Venezia. It's the Venetian embassy, or Casa Bailaggio, the Venetian palace in Topane, in Pera, redesigned in the late 18th century, around 1780. And here we see it with this is a view from mid-19th century. It's a view that shows us the two most Italian typical landmarks, so the Palazzo Venezia and the Tower of Galata, the Venetian and the Genoese presence, the Tower of Galata, built in the 14th century by the Genoese. I will focus more on Palazzo Venezia. The story of the Galata Tower is very complex, and it is a building that went through several renovations. Also Palazzo Venezia, but Palazzo Venezia is easier to trace historically. Now, the patron of this building was an ambassador, a Venetian bailo to the Ottoman Porte, Andrea Memmo. Here he is shown in, after he returned to Venice, he became procuratore. He had a rather important role in the government. And he is shown here with the insignia of his role of procuratore, with a drawing for a square, a large square in Padua, and this is the facade of Palazzo Venezia, which he sponsored. He also most probably contributed to design, because he was directly interested in with the help of Polish Pope, a Polish priest who was versed in architecture. Andrea Memmo designed this palace, this Venetian palace. So here the inspiration was Palladian. He wanted to really, in his writings, this is clear, he wanted really to leave an imprint of his cultural background, Venetian, Palladian, whatsoever, in Istanbul. And usually the inspiration for the design is considered to be this villa by Palladio. So here we see interesting metamorphosis of Palazzo Venezia. In the 17th century, it was mostly like an Ottoman building, a wooden Ottoman building. Still in the mid-18th century, it was a wooden building. This is not very accurate, I think. From written sources, we can understand that the Venetian palace in 1740 was still like an Ottoman konak. It was not real. Now, at some point, Andrea Memmo decides to change this image. So this is an important point in the history of Italian architectural craft, because it's directly there is a decision behind, and with an intention of representing cultural identity. So this Andrea Memmo was the building was not executed exactly in this shape. We see this is a fragment from the previous image here. So this is how it was executed. Then it was used by the Austrian in the 19th century. You know, Venice ceased to, in the beginning of the 19th century, was no longer independent, and it was part of the Habsburg Empire. The Habsburg decided to use the Venetian because of its prestige. Of course, it was a very important landmark, and they used the palace as an embassy until the First World War. Before the First World War, they even rebuilt it entirely. So the present Palazzo Venezia is not so Italian as it is usually, not so Venetian. See, it's very different from the building that Andrea Memmo designed and constructed. So it's an Austrian Habsburg building, actually. Italy, after the First World War, got it back from Austria because Italy was on the side of the victors, and in the peace treaty there was also the restitution of the palace. So now, in this case, even with an official Venetian landmark like Palazzo Venezia, it is not always easy and immediate to understand how Italian, why it is should be considered Italian. For instance, in the previous period, I would consider this more Ottoman than Venetian. This is the most clearly Italian and Venetian phase, and then we have another layer, so even with an official building, this Italian character has to be understood, and in a context, in a story, it's not so obvious. And things become even more complex when we deal with less official buildings like residential and later a hotel in Tepe-Bashir, designed by Guglielmo Semprini, or this Casa Bottega, designed by a prominent Italian architect, Art Nouveau architect. But for a Dutch owner, for a Dutch tailor, purveyor to the Sultan in the second. So how this is more cosmopolitan, international Art Nouveau than simply Italian, I would say, even though the architect is Italian. This, on the other hand, is a very official Italian building. It's a part of the Church of St. Anthony, designed as an Italian national church in an official revivalist Italian Gothic style. So before this church was designed, other churches were in different styles, were more linked to the Renaissance heritage, the Roman early Christian or Renaissance heritage. With the intervention of the government, the preferred style will be this medieval revival for several reasons. Now we are going to consider other aspects of the Italianness of some buildings in Istanbul. This, to me, is one of the most Italian-looking buildings. In fact, it is clearly modeled on Palazzo Farnese, the landmark of the Italian Renaissance. But it has nothing to do with Italy. It's the British Embassy, now consulate, designed by William James Smith in the mid-19th century for the British Government. Why it looks so Italian? Italian Renaissance style was very fashionable in London in the period, especially for buildings that had sort of civic and social importance. In fact, rather than being directly modeled on Palazzo Farnese, it is almost a copy of the Reform Club in Pall Mall in London, which was designed a few years earlier by Charles Babbage, by a British Victorian prominent architect. So Italianness is a very fluid concept. We have to understand what is more historically, I'm sorry, there is a mistake, Italian, as a word what is more historically relevant in order to understand the connections that the encounter, I mentioned, my title is Mediterranean Encounters, Italian Architecture in Istanbul. So, to understand the reasons, the meanings of this encounter, we must consider historical approach, historical background. There has been, at least since the Renaissance, or even earlier, a sort of Italian diaspora in early modern Europe and the Mediterranean and beyond. Later it will be also beyond. So we can remind Italian architects like Aristotele Fioravanti working in Hungary with Matthias Corvinus, we know about a connection that surely existed between Mehmed II and Italian Renaissance. Recent interpretation of Ottoman architecture by Gülür Necipoglu are meant to re-situate Ottoman classical architecture in a broader Renaissance, and I think it's one of the most interesting interpretations of this connection, of this historical link between. And we have, of course, the Mannerists working for Francis I and Fontainebleau. We have the Mannerists working in Prague. We have the broad phenomenon of English Palladianism, which is not limited to one city or it's the source Palladio was highly admired and interpreted and refashioned. And then we have Peter the Great at St. Petersburg. This is, I think, a crucial note, the nodal point in the history of this Italian artistic diaspora, because with Peter the Great, a new capital, a modern city is built from scratch, and the Italian intervention has several symbolic meanings, not last the symbolic association between St. Petersburg and Rome as a myth or as an ideal link. Russia had somehow inherited, also claimed to have inherited this legacy of the Roman legacy. Now, Peter the Great built St. Petersburg, and not only him, but also Catherine II, his other rulers of Russia, built St. Petersburg largely with the aid, with the intervention of Italian, culturally and linguistically Italian builders and architects, but actually they came from southern Switzerland, most of them from Ticino, from the country. And so Quarenghi, Rossi, Rastrelli, these names were very important. Now, why I focus more on St. Petersburg? Because there is also an important symbolic link between St. Petersburg and Istanbul, I believe. Several historians have pointed to the fact that the modernizing sultans like Selim III, Mahmud II, and later all the way to Atatürk, maybe, but they all either consciously or unconsciously followed in part the path shown by Peter the Great. So, and when we come to more recent, more in the 19th century, the Italian contributions, Gaspare Fossati is the real link, the living and historical link between St. Petersburg and Constantinople, Istanbul. He, before coming to Istanbul to build the Russian embassy, he was engaged in several projects in Moscow and St. Petersburg. He taught at the Academy of Architecture, and Nicholas II chose him for this task, designing a new monumental, imposing embassy that should be a symbol of increased Russian influence in the Ottoman Empire and in the Eastern Mediterranean. So Fossati here really brings a piece of this kind of neoclassicism is based on what his predecessors had done in St. Petersburg. It's the neoclassical grandeur of Russian neoclassicism transferred from St. Petersburg to Istanbul. And this is quite interesting because in the same years also Mahmud II was building his new palace on. This is really the breaking point in the history, I think, of recent Ottoman architecture. So the shift from Topkapi, we don't have Tokapi, and all of a sudden Dolmabahce. We have other structures like this in between, and this is somehow really, it echoes also St. Peter, the classicism. So I think Fossati was successful in this city also because of his Russian. And look at his Darul Funun, compare with Zakharov's Maimonides. So if we take off the spire, it's really comparable. The scale of these pediments, the rhythm of the so after being engaged in this official commission, Fossati also restored Hagia Sophia. His most important contribution to the history of this city is probably the restoration of Hagia Sophia. After Fossati, after these official commissions, he also was involved in more commercial kind of projects, and then he started his Italian followers coming to Istanbul because there were new opportunities, because the city was being transformed. There was a desire of giving a new image to this, and there was a request, really, of a demand for Western builders. The Italians were the most easily available, I would say, for several reasons. There was a crisis in the building sector in Italy. There was no longer great patronage of architecture had finished. The church was no longer sponsoring, so and also the aristocratic family were rendered. So beginning in the beginning of the 19th century later, there will be not only architects but also workers, masons, contractors, all the aspects of construction, of architectural construction, represented in this flow from Italy to the Eastern Mediterranean, especially Egypt and Turkey. And what they create is a métissage of forms, and it's, I try to show here the starting point. When the Italians arrived in Pera, Pera is still an Ottoman town. It has wooden houses, it's not the way. Still in the 18th century and even beginning of the 19th. Now, with the intervention of these foreigners, things begin to change in this way. This is a more rationalized, regularized version of the more utilitarian and of the Turkish, how it's more compact. Here you see still bay windows, typical of the Turkish wooden house. An Italian architect without academic background, Semprini. He was mainly a contractor, but he signed many projects as architect. He was considered. And he uses this very interesting asymmetrical composition. There is a triangular bay window and balconies. He would have never done this in Italy, in Rome. So it's interesting to see how there is not only Italian influence going in one day from Italy to, but there is also the other way. A lot of Ottoman ideas and Ottoman influences in the architecture. So this is an apartment as a type of building. This is of course not local, but it is made with wood. All the facade, this three-dimensional facade, is somehow also related to the. Here, the same kind of facade is masonry, no longer. And this is the most, we would say, foreign, the most Italian, this is a Renaissance revival facade. It is in Istiklal. It was the mention of an Armenian Catholic banker, Kochoro, and Armenian Catholics had also a strong connection with Italy, of course, because of their being Catholic, and many Armenian Catholics living in Beyoğlu wanted to represent, display somehow their more Western-oriented identity through this kind of architecture. So when when it comes to deciding who is Italian, what is Italian architecture, one has really to consider all these nuances in this complex situation. Even the architects themselves, I mentioned Fossati also was born in Switzerland. He became an Italian citizen, of course, only after Italian citizenship was created in 1860. Before 1860 there was no Italian citizenship. So other architects like Barberini, Barberini, who was closely in touch with Fossati, and he was also more like a contractor, big contractor, working also for the state, rather than simply an architect. Barberini flew to Istanbul in 1848, and he escaped for political. He was one of the other reasons for the presence of many Italians of a sort of not really working class profile, but professional, is the Risorgimento, the struggle of many Italians against Austria and the papacy. Many political exiles found shelter asylum in the Ottoman Empire, because there was a sort of common enemy, and it was anyway seen as an opportunity, rightly an opportunity for modernizing the city. So Istanbul began to change, not only because of people like Fossati, who were fully academically trained and had a reputation already. Istanbul changed also from below, for the migration of workers and middle class or lower middle class people who created an environment. They were numerous enough. They were some 10,000 around 1860. There will be even more in the beginning of the 20th century. So their number was enough to influence, to reshape significantly the environment, because you don't really, from here, from this settle, from this environment to this, only by order, by decision of a prime minister or a minister of works. No, you need the social basis to. So I believe that without this community, and it's not only the architect, it's the community at large, this Levantine, Italian, mixed of course, not only Italian, also French, but it's this community that creates the basis for change, for at least in large part, because change was also instigated from above. But there is an interesting synergy in this process. And Levantine fabric, here we see a fraction of this Levantine space near Tunnel, So the Grand Rue de Paris, present day, still was much narrower and not so regularized as it is today, still in the beginning of the 20th century. And then buildings of this size that are most what I showed before, small houses, townhouses with a bay window that recalls the Ottoman legacy. And there is only one exception. There is apartment Camondo. Camondo is the only building here, the only residential structure that occupies an entire block. Camondo was a Sephardi Jewish bank. He was originally an Austrian absolute citizen, and after, because his family had been based in Trieste for a long period, after 1860 he also became an Italian. He also acquired, he was also ennobled by King Vittorio Emanuele. He became a count, and he is an important figure in the urban history of Istanbul, Beyoğlu, this part. This is only one of his many buildings that were investments made of a commercial kind. He usually bought several properties and then put them down and rebuilt in this way urban blocks that are rather new for the fabric of Istanbul. His architect was also, the architect mostly working for Camondo was Giorgio Stampa, who was originally from Como, from northern Italy, but then he studied probably in England. This is my guess at this point of my research, and probably in England, and later he also naturalized as a Briton. But he worked extensively for Camondo, and many of these Han apartment buildings are designed by him. Finally, Levantine modernity. I return to probably the greatest protagonist of this encounter, Italian-Ottoman encounter. Daronco's key features is this his use of an architectural language that was modern and international. He's probably the most innovative in the panorama of late 19th century, early 20th century architecture in Istanbul. And he has a strong connection with the history of it. He came in 1893 to design the grounds for an Ottoman exhibition, and then it was never materialized because of the earthquake of 1894. So he stayed. The Sultan asked him to stay to restore the buildings that had been damaged by the earthquake, and that was his initiation to the legacy of the city, because he drew and restored both Byzantine and Ottoman buildings. He was attracted by the many phases, many aspects of the Ottoman heritage, not only Sinan and the classical, but also the Ottoman, so-called Ottoman Baroque, and the later forms of Ottoman architecture, and the Levantine heritage. I would say this is probably the most successful design in this line of Levantine modernity, Levantine architecture. This we already saw. It's more Central European, the fer forgé looks more French. It's rather conventional, Art Nouveau, of a high quality, but rather conventional. Here he does, unfortunately this was not built. This is for an Italian patron, Enrico Santoro. here he really uses the Levantine heritage, this what had been shaped gradually by, as I shown here. So that kind of design is at this level of elaboration, with that facade for Casa Santoro, unfortunately not built, but here you really see how international and at the same time how local could be this kind of Art Nouveau, because there are influences of the Viennese secession. There is this three-dimensional facade, the decorative pattern that are also comparable to what Austrian and Central European artists were doing with the Byzantine tradition, with the Byzantine inspiration. So Daronco is really an extraordinary figure who managed to synthesize, using diverse sources, he created an original style, an original language. Even in official buildings, he's highly original and unconventional. This is the summer embassy the Italian summer embassy in Tarabia on the Bosphorus. So it is an official building representing the Ottoman government. Daronco volunteered his design and his work in 1905 and 6. So he was not paid for this design. He worked he did it as a gift to the Italian government. The Italian government, in its turn, is not very grateful, that does not appreciate very much this gift, because look at the condition, deplorable. It's really a shame. The building has been abandoned after the capital moved to Ankara. But of course, one may have found thousands of new uses for such an important building. For bureaucratic problems and for neglect has come to this point. I was involved in several attempts to save this building. I know of nothing that is really concretely happening. There is scaffolding around it now, but I don't think there is a real serious plan for saving this extraordinary building. We are almost concluding. Look how different is the vision, the architectural vision, the official vision of the Italian government and Daronco's vision of it. So this is a new embassy in Machka. Today it is a school because it was never used as an embassy. This was designed, it is usually attributed to Mongeri, but it's not Mongeri, it is ministerial art. I found several archival documents, and this drawing also is signed Enrico Boglio. This is the architect who worked for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Enrico Boglio stayed in Istanbul several years. The government decided finally to build such a majestic, imposing building because Italy was engaged in a new kind of imperialist dream in the Eastern Mediterranean. Otherwise, the other buildings were much more modest. They did not, the first Italian embassy did not compare to the British or the French. Only now in the beginning, around 1909, the Libyan war is very close. There is this statement of display of power, of authority, and it is rather, it's an interesting design. I mean, it's a Venetian Renaissance. There is probably Palazzo Grimani in Venice might be the source, but it's very conventional. It's a revivalist style, nothing comparable to the inventiveness of Daronco. So there are several ways of being Italian, of building Italian in official and unofficial, the Levantine background, which is mixed with the local tradition, and something that comes from outside, which is rather imposed from above. Another example of official style, but enacted by a very sensitive architect, is the Church of Sant'Elia in Beyoğlu. I'm sure many of you have visited it. This is a drawing that shows us an early phase of the design, it was implemented in a different way. As I said before, Mongeri, this is the art. Mongeri was born in Istanbul, from a family that was here since 1848. Again, 1848, the political migration is important. But he was born in 1871, and he studied in Milan, in Brera. He was sent to Italy, to Milan, for his architectural education. His master was Camillo Boito, a man, probably one of the greatest, one of the most important figures in late 19th century Italian architecture, and a theorist of the Italian national style. So Camillo Boito gave to Mongeri this imprint of what a national style could be, and here Mongeri applied this method, this idea of to an Italian church. Later, he will apply the same idea to Turkish architecture. He will be also engaged by Atatürk in Ankara, and he will shift from Italian national to Turkish national style, but with his initial experience with Boito, I think it's important to understand his contributions. Other works, Karaköy Palace, that is a blending of Byzantine and also in the interior there are Ottoman motifs. The facade is strongly Byzantine revival and more modern sort of Art Deco design in Machka Palace, and this is a detail of the Italian Società Operaia in Beyoğlu. There is still, this is a recent picture, there is still this association that was founded in 1863. The honorary president was Garibaldi, no less, and there are also letters in the archives exchanged. And why an Italian work? It's a sort of something in between a charity and a union, not a union in the political sense. It was to care for the workers. There were many workers who were also poor, sometimes unemployed in the Italian community. So the notables of the community, and some architects among them. Semprini was the president of this società. So the notables of the community cared for the less the unprivileged part of the community. And so, in conclusion, speaking of Italian architecture in Istanbul, one has to consider many aspects. There is this background beginning in the Renaissance of the diaspora of Italian art, and Italian artists may have not even been conscious of being Italian, may have not perceived themselves as Italian, but rather as Venetian or Bolognese or Genoese. But when they went abroad, they were addressed and perceived as Italian. So Italian identity is a complex matter, and I think it comes out also out of this kind of cultural encounter, because before 1860, as I said, there is no citizenship, there is no official Italian identity, but there are many ways of speaking of Italian cultural linguistic identity. Now, what we saw here, there are on one side academically trained architects like Fossati, Mongeri. There are also less formally, less officially engaged architect. What comes out of this encounter is, I think, an interesting form of modernity. It is a very lively, cosmopolitan environment, which is not bound to the schemes and pattern of the nation state. Modernity, as we know it in Western Europe, existed because there were national states. Modernity in the Eastern Mediterranean is another thing, and I think we understand this kind of modernity also by focusing on the Italian Ottoman encounter. Thank you.